Marcus Cole pushed his cleaning cart through the long silver hallway of the Celestial Accord space station and tried to make himself invisible, which was not hard because nobody ever looked at the janitor anyway, especially not the aliens who walked past him like he was nothing more than furniture or a shadow on the wall. The station orbited a planet called Thesson Prime, and it served as a meeting place for all the great species of the Galactic Concordat, a government that controlled thousands of worlds and billions of lives across the stars. And humans were the newest and weakest members of this grand alliance, barely tolerated and often mocked for their soft bodies and short lifespans. Marcus had worked on this station for 7 years now, and he had learned to keep his head down and his mouth shut, because that was what humans did in a galaxy that saw them as children playing at being civilized, and he cleaned the messes that the superior races left behind. Complaint, without hope, without dreams of anything better. Today the station buzzed with unusual activity, and Marcus noticed that the Valori ambassadors moved through the corridors with nervous energy, their crystalline skin flickering with colors that meant worry or fear, and even the massive Krethnar warriors seemed tense, their forearms held close to their armored bodies as they guarded something important. Marcus stopped his cart near a viewing window and pretended to clean the glass while he watched a group of Krethnar soldiers escort a sealed container through the main corridor. And the container was made of black metal covered with symbols that looked older than anything Marcus had ever seen, symbols that seemed to shift and move when he looked at them directly. "Move along, human," a Valori guard said, with disgust in his voice, and Marcus nodded and pushed his cart away, because that was what he always did. He moved along. He stayed quiet, but curiosity burned in his chest, and he found himself following the group from a distance, staying in the maintenance corridors that ran parallel to the main halls, watching through small windows as the aliens carried their mysterious cargo toward the high-security wing of the station. He heard them talking in their own language, but his translation implant converted their words into something he could understand. And what he heard made his heart beat faster with a mixture of fear and wonder. "The Voranthai must be destroyed," one of the Krethnar said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "It has killed every being who has tried to wield it, and we cannot risk it falling into the wrong hands." "The Blade of Ending," another soldier replied, "forged by the precursors themselves before they vanished from this universe, and every species that has touched it has died screaming as their minds burned to nothing." Marcus pressed himself against the wall and listened as they discussed the artifact, learning that it had been found on a dead world at the edge of known space, a planet where an entire civilization had been reduced to dust and shadows, and the blade had been lying in the ruins, waiting for someone foolish enough to pick it up. The Concordat Council had decided that the weapon was too dangerous to exist, and so they were transporting it to a disposal facility, where it would be thrown into the heart of a dying star and destroyed forever. And Marcus thought that sounded like a very good plan, because anything that killed everyone who touched it should probably not exist. He returned to his regular duties and tried to forget what he had heard, but the image of that black container stayed in his mind, and he wondered what kind of weapon could frighten beings who had conquered entire galaxies and bent the laws of physics to their will. That night, Marcus was cleaning the lower decks when the alarms began to scream, and red lights flashed through every corridor as the station shook with the force of multiple explosions, and he grabbed onto a support beam as the floor tilted beneath his feet. "Attention all personnel," a voice announced over the speakers. "We are under attack by hostile forces. All civilians must proceed to emergency shelters immediately." Marcus tried to run toward the nearest shelter, but another explosion sealed the corridor behind him, and he found himself trapped in a section of the station that was rapidly losing atmosphere, and he stumbled through the darkness, looking for any way to escape. He found a door that led to a storage room, and he dove inside, just as the hallway behind him vented into space, and the emergency seal activated and trapped him in this small space, with no way out and no way to call for help. The room was dark, except for a strange blue glow that came from the corner. And when Marcus turned to look, he saw the black container, sitting against the wall, cracked open from the force of the explosions, and something inside was pulsing with light like a heartbeat. He approached slowly, and his hands were shaking, and his breath came in short gasps as he looked down at the most dangerous weapon in the known universe. And it was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen in his entire life. The blade was black as the void between stars, but veins of blue and white light ran through it like rivers of fire, and it seemed to call to him, to whisper his name in a voice that was not a voice. And Marcus knew he should back away. He should find something to cover it. He should do anything except what he was about to do. But the station shook again, and the container tipped, and the blade began to slide toward him, and without thinking, he reached out to push it away from himself, and his fingers closed around the hilt. Pain exploded through his body and his mind and his soul. He was being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time, and visions crashed through his consciousness like waves against a shore. He saw beings of pure light and thought, the precursors, ancient beyond measure, and they were forging this blade in the heart of a star, pouring their knowledge and power into it, creating a weapon to fight an enemy that came from beyond the edges of reality itself. He saw thousands of aliens try to wield the blade, and he watched them die one by one, as their minds could not contain what the weapon demanded, as their neural pathways burned like paper in a fire, as they screamed and fell and became nothing. And then he saw something else, something that made no sense. He saw the precursors searching across the galaxy for a species that can survive the bonding, a species whose minds worked differently, a species that could hold chaos and order together, that could feel and think at the same time, that could believe impossible things before breakfast. The precursors had called it cognitive dissonance capacity, the ability to hold contradictory thoughts and emotions simultaneously without breaking. And they had never found a species that possessed it in sufficient quantity. Until now. Marcus opened his eyes, and he was lying on the floor of the storage room with the blade still in his hand, and he was alive. Somehow, impossibly wonderfully, terrifyingly alive. And the weapon hummed against his palm like it was happy to finally find someone who could carry it. The door to the storage room exploded inward, and 3 soldiers in black armor rushed through, their weapons raised, their faces hidden behind masks marked with a symbol that Marcus recognized from news reports. The Purifiers, a terrorist group that believed only the elder races deserved to exist, that younger species like humans were a pollution that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. Kill the human, their leader commanded, and secure the artifact. Marcus stood up and the blade sang in his hand, and he moved without thinking, without training, guided by instincts that were not his own. And in 30 seconds 3 elite alien warriors lay dead at his feet. He stood among the bodies, and he was shaking and terrified and more alive than he had ever been. And somewhere in the distance he could hear more soldiers coming, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The human janitor had awakened the forbidden blade, and the galaxy was about to learn that they had underestimated humanity for far too long. Marcus ran through the damaged corridors of the Celestial Accord with the blade still gripped in his hand, and emergency lights painted everything in shades of red and orange as he searched for a way to reach the other survivors, and every few minutes he encountered more Purifier soldiers who tried to kill him, and every time the blade guided his movements and kept him alive. He did not understand how he was doing any of this, because he had never trained in combat, and he had never held a weapon more dangerous than a mop. But the Voranthai seemed to know what to do, and it shared that knowledge with him through some connection he could not explain, a bond between his mind and the ancient artifact that grew stronger with every passing moment. Finally, he found a group of station security officers who were defending a barricade against the terrorists, and when he approached them, they raised their weapons at him with fear in their eyes, because they could see the legendary blade in his hand, and they knew what it was supposed to do to anyone who touched it. "Stay back," a Krethnar officer shouted. "Drop the weapon and get on the ground." "I am on your side," Marcus said, and he was surprised by how calm his voice sounded when his heart was beating so fast. "The purifiers attacked us, and I need to help." "That blade kills everyone who touches it," a Valori officer said, her crystalline face shifting through colors of confusion and disbelief. "You should be dead, human. How are you still standing?" "I do not know," Marcus admitted, "but I am alive, and I can fight, and there are more terrorists coming, so maybe we can talk about this later?" Before anyone could answer, another wave of purifiers attacked the barricade, and Marcus moved to meet them without hesitation. And the blade danced in his hands like it was made of light instead of metal, and he cut through the enemy soldiers with a skill that should have been impossible for a simple janitor. When the battle was over, the security officers looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror, and Marcus realized that his life as an invisible nobody was finished forever, because what he had done could not be hidden or forgotten. The attack on the station was eventually stopped, and the surviving purifiers were captured or killed, and Marcus was taken into custody by Concordat security forces who did not know what to do with him, because nothing like this had ever happened before in all the long history of the galaxy. They put him in a holding cell and took the blade away from him, or they tried to take it away. But when they locked it in a containment unit, it simply vanished and reappeared in his hand a few seconds later, and no matter what they did, they could not separate the weapon from its wielder. Scientists came to study him, and they ran tests on his brain and his body and his blood, and they argued among themselves in languages he did not understand. And he could see that they were frightened and confused and angry, because everything they thought they knew about the universe had been proven wrong. The neural bandwidth required to bond with the Voranthai is beyond any organic species we have encountered, one scientist explained to the Security Council that had gathered to discuss his fate. The blade demands a mind that can process contradictory information simultaneously without suffering cognitive collapse, and no species in our records has ever demonstrated this ability, the scientist continued. But the humans survived, a Krethnar general said with suspicion in his voice. How is that possible if what you say is true? We believe that humans possess a unique neurological trait that we overlooked because we considered them too primitive to study seriously, the scientist replied, and Marcus could hear shame in her voice. Their brains are wired differently than ours. They can hold opposing thoughts and emotions at the same time. They can believe in things they know are impossible. They can hope when logic says hope is foolish. That sounds like a defect, a Valori Council member said with contempt, not a gift. The precursors did not think so, the scientist responded. We analyzed the data that the blade transmitted into the human's mind during bonding, and we discovered that the precursors spent thousands of years searching for a species with exactly these traits. They called it cognitive dissonance capacity, and they believed it was essential for wielding their greatest weapons. Marcus sat in his cell and listened to them talk about him like he was a specimen in a laboratory, and anger burned in his chest, because he had spent his whole life being ignored and dismissed, and now he was being treated like a threat, simply because he had survived something that should have killed him. The blade pulsed warmly against his palm, as if it understood his feelings, that the weapon was not just a tool. It was alive in some way he could not explain, and it had chosen him for reasons that went beyond simple biology. Days passed, and the galaxy learned what had happened on the Celestial Accord, and the news spread across thousands of worlds in a matter of hours, and suddenly Everyone had an opinion about the human janitor who had awakened the forbidden blade. Some species demanded that Marcus be executed immediately because they feared what a human with such power might do, and others wanted him to be studied and dissected so they could learn how to create more wielders, and a few suggested that humanity should be expelled from the Concordat entirely, because a young race could not be trusted with precursor technology. But there were also voices that spoke in his defense, voices that said perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about humans all along, voices that wondered if the precursors had known something that the current civilizations had forgotten. Pause. One of those voices belonged to Admiral Vexthera of the Krethnar fleet, a legendary warrior who had earned her rank through centuries of service and sacrifice. And she came to visit Marcus in his cell one night when the guards were not paying attention. "I have seen things at the edge of the galaxy that would drive most beings mad," she told him, her 4 arms crossed over her scarred chest. Anomalies that consumed entire fleets, darkness that moved like it was alive, whispers from the void that spoke of an enemy that existed before the stars were born. "What does that have to do with me?" Marcus asked. "The precursors did not create the Voronthai as a trophy or a symbol of their power," Vexthera said. "They created it as a weapon to fight something terrible, something that they could not defeat with their technology or their armies, and they left it behind, hoping that someone would be able to use it when that enemy returned." "The enemy is coming back." "I know it is," she replied, and for the first time, Marcus saw fear in the eyes of a being who had fought in 100 wars. "Ancient warning systems are activating across the galaxy, systems that have been dormant for millions of years, and the readings match the records we found in precursor ruins. The enemy is waking up, and we have no way to stop it." Marcus looked at the blade in his hand and understood finally why it had called to him, why it had bonded with him when it had killed so many others, and the weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a mountain made of shadows. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "The High Council will give you a choice," Vexthera said. "You can surrender yourself for study and imprisonment, or you can join a mission to investigate the disturbances at the edge of known space. A mission that will probably kill everyone who goes on it." "It is not," she admitted. "But it is the only one you will get, and I think you already know which option you will take, because I have seen how you fight, and I have seen the fire in your eyes. And you are not the kind of being who sits in a cell while the universe burns." She was right, Marcus realized. He had spent his whole life being invisible, and powerless, and afraid, and now he had a chance to matter, to make a difference, to be something more than a janitor who cleaned up other people's messes. When the High Council offered him their choice, he did not hesitate. He chose the unknown. He chose the danger. He chose to face whatever was waiting in the darkness at the edge of everything. Because that was what humans did. They ran toward the fire instead of away from it. They hoped when hope was foolish. They fought when fighting was impossible. And they never, ever gave up. The ship was called the Last Light, and it was beautiful in a dangerous way, sleek and dark, and bristling with weapons that could crack open planets. And Marcus stood on the boarding ramp, with the Voronthai hanging at his hip, and watched as the rest of the crew arrived, one by one. They were misfits, all of them, beings who did not fit neatly into the orderly structure of the Galactic Concordat. And Marcus suspected that was exactly why they had been chosen for this mission. Because normal soldiers would never accept a human janitor as their leader. Admiral Vexthera was the first to board, her scarred body moving with the grace of a predator, despite her age. And she nodded at Marcus with something that might have been respect, before disappearing into the ship to inspect its weapon systems. Next came Zara, a Valori scientist who had been exiled from her homeworld for asking too many dangerous questions about the precursors. and her crystalline skin shifted through colors of excitement and nervousness as she carried crates of research equipment up the ramp. Then there was Crix, a young Krethnar warrior who had been discharged from the military for refusing to execute prisoners of war, and his forearms were marked with shame tattoos, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination that Marcus recognized because he saw the same fire in himself. The crew also included a pilot named Ven, who belonged to a species Marcus had never seen before, small and quick, with silver fur and eyes that could see into dimensions that other beings could not perceive, and a medical officer named Dr. Flara, who had given up a prestigious career to serve on frontier ships, where she could actually help people instead of just writing papers about them. There were 12 crew members in total, and they came from 8 different species, and none of them should have worked well together. But somehow they did, maybe because they all understood what it felt like to be an outsider, to be judged and dismissed and told that they did not belong. Marcus trained with the blade every day during the long journey to the edge of known space, and the Voranthai revealed its secrets to him slowly, teaching him abilities that made his head spin with their impossibility. He learned that the blade could cut through more than just physical matter. It could slice through the barriers between dimensions if he concentrated hard enough, and he could see glimpses of other realities, other versions of the universe where things had happened differently. He discovered that the weapon allowed him to sense the thoughts and emotions of other beings across vast distances, not reading their minds exactly, but feeling their presence like lights in the darkness, and he could tell when someone was lying, or afraid, or planning violence. Most terrifying of all, he learned that the blade could channel his emotions into raw, destructive force, turning anger into fire and sorrow, into cold and love, into a shield that could stop almost anything, and the power grew stronger every time he used it. But there was a cost. There was always a cost, and Marcus noticed that after each training session, he felt a little bit weaker, a little bit emptier, as if the blade was drinking something from him that he could not replace. The Voranthai requires sacrifice, Zara explained when he asked her about it. The precursors designed it to draw power from the wielder's life force, their memories, their very sense of self, and every time you use its abilities, you give up a piece of who you are. How much can I give before there is nothing left? Marcus asked. We do not know, she admitted. No one has ever survived long enough to find out. Marcus accepted this truth because he did not have another choice, and he continued to train, because the alternative was arriving at their destination, unprepared for whatever was waiting for. The crew grew closer during the weeks of travel, and Marcus found himself becoming friends with beings he would never have spoken to in his old life. And he learned that the galaxy was full of people who did not fit the stereotypes he had been taught to believe. Vexthira told him stories about her youth, about the family she had lost to the anomalies at the edge of space, about the nightmares that still haunted her after all these centuries. And Marcus understood that even the mightiest warriors carried wounds that could not be seen. Crix taught him combat techniques that did not rely on the blade, showing him how to fight with his hands and his feet and his mind. And the young Krethnar admitted that he had always admired humans, because they never stopped trying, even when they had no chance of winning. Zara shared her research about the precursors, theories and discoveries that had gotten her expelled from every respectable institution in the galaxy. Believed that the ancient beings had not died out, but had transformed themselves into something beyond physical existence. Said, I think they are still watching us, she said one night when they were alone in her laboratory. I think they have been waiting for someone to pick up where they left off, and I think that someone is you. I am just a janitor, Marcus replied. But even as he said the words, he knew they were no longer true. He had not been just a janitor, since the moment his fingers closed around the hilt of the forbidden blade. The last light flew deeper into unexplored space, and the stars grew strange and distant, their light tinged with colors that should not exist. And the crew became quieter as they approached coordinates that appeared on no official map. They passed through regions where time moved differently, where the ship's clocks ran backward for hours before directing themselves, and they saw things floating in the void that looked like the cell corpses of creatures larger than worlds. The precursors called this region the Threshold, Vexthera announced when they were 3 days from their destination. Beyond it lies the edge of our reality, the place where our universe ends and something else begins. What is on the other side? Marcus asked. Nothing good, she replied. I have been here before, many years ago when I was young and foolish, and I lost my entire clan to what came out of the darkness. And I have spent every moment since then preparing for the day when I would return. Marcus looked out the viewport at the twisted space ahead of them, and felt the blade pulse against his hip. And he realized that the weapon was eager for what was coming, that it had been created for exactly this purpose, and it had been waiting for millions of years to fulfill its destiny. The warning sensors began to flash, and alarms filled the ship with their urgent cry, and the crew rushed to their stations. Something massive moved in the void ahead of them, something that should not exist, something that the precursors had died trying to stop. The enemy had found them before they could find it, and Marcus knew that the real battle was about to begin. He drew the Voranthai from its sheath, and the blade sang with joy and hunger. And he walked to the bridge of the last light, with his shoulders straight and his heart pounding, ready to face whatever nightmare was waiting in the darkness at the edge of everything. This was why he had survived when all others had died. This was why the blade had chosen a human janitor instead of a mighty warrior or a brilliant scientist. And he would not let the galaxy down. He would not let his crew down. He would not let himself down. The threshold was crossed and there was no going back. The enemy was not what Marcus had expected. It was not a fleet of ships, or an army of soldiers, or even a monstrous creature, like the beasts in the stories he had read as a child. And what he saw through the viewport of the last light was somehow worse than anything he could have imagined. They were absences, voids in the shape of thought, places where existence simply stopped and nothing remained, and they moved through space like shadows that had learned to hunt, spreading across the stars and consuming everything they touched. Hollows, Vexthera whispered, and Marcus could hear terror in her voice for the first time since he had known her. That is what the precursors called them. They are not alive in any way we understand. They are hungers given form, and they eat reality itself. The hollows drifted toward the last light with terrible patience, and Marcus could feel them pressing against his mind, cold and empty and endlessly hungry, grew warm as if it was trying to protect him from their attention. We need to run, Crick said, his 4 hands gripping his weapon so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. We cannot fight these things. Nothing can fight these things. The precursors fought them, Marcus replied, and they won, at least for a while, or we would not be here to have this conversation. The precursors had armies and fleets and technology beyond our understanding, Zara said. We have one ship and a blade that might kill its wielder at any moment. Then I guess we should make sure it counts. Marcus walked to the airlock and sealed himself inside before anyone could stop him. And he opened the outer door and stepped into the void, with nothing but the Voranthai to protect him from the cold and the emptiness and the creatures that waited in the darkness. The blade created a bubble of warmth and air around him, just as he had known it would. Hollows with the weapon raised, and his heart full of fear that he forced himself to ignore. The first hollow saw him coming and turned to face him, and up close it was even more terrible than he had thought. A wound in the fabric of existence, a place where light and matter and time simply ended. And Marcus felt his mind trying to break apart just from looking at it. But the Voranthai sang in his hand and poured strength into his thoughts. and he struck at the hollow with all the power he could gather, and the blade cut through the impossible creature like it was made of smoke. The hollow screamed, if something without a voice could scream, and it dissolved into nothing, truly nothing, not even the absence it had been before, and the other creatures turned to look at Marcus, with what might have been surprise. "They can be killed," he shouted into his communicator. "The blade can kill them. Focus all fire on the ones I wound, and we might have a chance." Battle that followed was the worst thing Marcus had ever experienced. Worse than the attack on the Celestial Accord. Worse than the loneliness of his old life. Worse than the nightmares that had haunted him since he first touched the forbidden blade. He flew through space and fought the hollows one by one, and each time he killed one, he felt a piece of himself slip away, memories fading, emotions dulling, his sense of who he was becoming harder to hold on to. The last light provided cover fire, and the crew fought with everything they had, but the hollows were endless, pouring through a rift in space that glowed with sickly light, a wound in reality that led somewhere else, somewhere that should have stayed sealed forever. "There are too many," Vexthera called over the communicator. "Marcus, we need to retreat and regroup." "If we retreat, they will follow us back to the galaxy," he replied. "We need to close the rift somehow." "Signatures from the other side," Zara reported. "This is just the beginning. There are millions more waiting to come through. Maybe billions." Marcus felt despair threatening to overwhelm him, but the blade would not let him give up. It pushed hope and courage into his heart, and he flew toward the rift with his weapon blazing. The hollows surrounded him, and some of them got through his defenses, and he watched in horror as they touched the last light and began to consume it. And he heard his friends screaming as the darkness ate through the hull. "No!" he shouted, and rage exploded out of him through the blade, a wave of golden fire that pushed the hollows back. But it was not enough. It could never be enough. He saw Crix die first, the young warrior standing in a breach in the hull, and fighting to give others time to escape, and the hollows consumed him before Marcus could reach him, leaving nothing behind, not even a body to mourn. Dr. Thalara went next, trying to save wounded crew members in the medical bay, her healing hands working until the very end, even as the darkness closed around her. Then the pilot kept the ship flying until the bridge was breached, and Marcus heard his final transmission, a prayer in a language he did not understand, before the connection went silent. One by one his friends died, and Marcus could do nothing to save them, and the grief and anger built inside him until he thought he would explode, and the blade drank his pain and turned it into power. Finally, only Vexthera remained, fighting on the ruined deck of the last light with weapons in all four of her hands, and she looked up at Marcus and smiled, even as the hollows closed in around her. "Finish it," she commanded. "Do what the precursors could not. Seal the rift forever and save the galaxy." "I do not know how," Marcus cried. "I cannot do this alone." "You are never alone," she replied. "You carry all of us with you. Everyone you have ever loved. Everyone you have ever lost. That is what makes you human. That is why the blade chose you." A hollow reached for her, and she did not run. She grabbed it and held it in place with all her strength, giving Marcus one final moment to act. "Go," she shouted. "Go now." Marcus flew toward the rift with tears freezing on his face, and behind him Vexthera died as she had lived, fighting against the darkness with every ounce of her being. He plunged into the rift, and reality twisted around him, and he found himself in a place that was not a place, a dimension between dimensions, where the echoes of the precursors still lingered. They spoke to him without words, sharing their knowledge and their sorrow, showing him how they had created the seal that had held the hollows back for millions of years, and showing him how it had failed, because nothing lasts forever, not even the works of gods. The blade can repair the seal, but it requires a wielder to become part of it, to exist forever at the threshold, holding back the darkness. Marcus understood what they were asking. They wanted him to sacrifice himself, to give up his life and his future and everything he might have been. And he would be alone for eternity, trapped between worlds, with nothing but the hollows for company. The precursors had been too afraid to make this choice. They had died hoping that someone else would come along, someone brave enough or foolish enough to do what they could not. Marcus thought about his crew, his friends, the people who had died believing in him. He thought about Earth, a world he had never seen, filled with humans who would never know his name. He thought about what it meant to be human, to hope when hope was foolish, to love when love brought pain, to fight when fighting was impossible. And he raised the Voronthai and prepared to make the sacrifice that the precursors could not. But somewhere in the chaos of his breaking heart, a new idea began to form. An idea that only a human would think to try. An idea that might just save everything. Marcus floated in the space between realities, with the Voronthai burning in his hand, and the echoes of the precursors watching him with ancient eyes. And he understood now why the blade had chosen a human, why it had rejected every other species in the galaxy. The precursors had seen sacrifice as an ending, a final act that would trap one soul in eternal darkness. And they had been too afraid to make that choice, because their minds worked in straight lines, cause and effect, one answer to every problem. But humans did not think that way. Humans found solutions that should not work. Humans connected with each other in ways that defied logic and reason, and Marcus realized that the precursors had been wrong about what the seal required. It did not need one being to sacrifice everything. It needed many beings to sacrifice something, a little piece of each of them woven together into something stronger than any single soul could be. Marcus told the precursor echoes, "That was your mistake. You thought you had to carry the weight by yourselves, but that is not how we work. That is not how any of us should work." He raised the blade and reached out with its power, not cutting through dimensions this time, but connecting them, stretching his awareness across the galaxy to touch every living mind he could find. Billions of beings felt his presence in that moment, a soft whisper in their thoughts, a gentle request that they did not have to answer if they did not want to. And Marcus showed them what he had seen, the hollows, the rift, the threat that would consume everything if the seal was not restored. "I am asking you to help me," he said, "not to die, not to give up your lives or your futures, just to share a small piece of yourselves, a memory, an emotion, a moment of hope or courage or love, something that you can spare without losing who you are." The response began slowly, a trickle of light. In the darkness, a few brave souls who answered his call without hesitation. A Valerie artist on a distant world gave her capacity for wonder, the feeling she had when she created something beautiful, and it flowed into Marcus and through him into the blade. A Krethnar soldier defending a frontier colony gave his courage, the strength that let him stand against impossible odds, and it joined the growing light. A human child on Earth, a little girl who had been dreaming about stars, gave her belief that tomorrow would be better than today, and her innocent hope burned brighter than anything else. More and more beings answered the call, thousands becoming millions, becoming billions. Species that had been enemies giving the same gifts. Individuals who had never agreed on anything, finding common ground in this one moment. They gave their anger and their joy, their sorrow and their determination, their memories of loss and their dreams of the future. It poured into the Voronthai until the blade blazed with light that could be seen across dimensions. The hollows recoiled from that light, screaming without voices, and Marcus flew toward the rift with the combined will of a galaxy at his back. He did not seal the wound in reality alone. He wove it shut with threads of connection, billions of souls linked together for one instant of perfect unity. And the seal that formed was not made of one eternal sacrifice, but of countless small gifts given freely. The rift closed with a sound like thunder, and a flash like the birth of a star. And the hollows were pushed back into their prison, and the seal held firm because it was made from the strongest material in the universe. Not power, not technology, not even the magic of the precursors. It was made from connection, from the bonds between beings who had chosen to care about something greater than themselves, and those bonds could not be broken, because they were action, renewed every moment by every act of love and courage and hope across the galaxy. Marcus emerged from the space between realities and found himself floating in normal space again, surrounded by the wreckage of the last light and the bodies of his friends. And the blade in his hand was different now, lighter somehow, no longer demanding sacrifice, but celebrating the connection it had helped create. Ships arrived within hours, rescue vessels from a dozen species responding to a distress signal that the last light had sent before it was destroyed. And they found Marcus Cole sitting on a piece of wreckage with tears streaming down his face. He wept for Vexthera and Crix and all the others who had died, and he wept for joy because their sacrifice had not been in vain, and he wept because he was still alive, when by all rights he should have been trapped at the threshold forever. The news of what had happened spread across the galaxy faster than light, and everyone who had participated in the Great Linking knew what they had done. They could feel the seal holding firm in the back of their minds, a constant reminder that they were all connected. Everything changed after that day. Humanity was no longer a probationary species, a young race barely tolerated by their elders. They were recognized as the bridge between chaos and order, the translators who had taught the galaxy how to fight together instead of alone. The Galactic Concordat reformed around new principles of cooperation and mutual respect, and the old hierarchies based on age and power began to crumble as species that had never spoken to each other found common ground. Marcus was offered admiralships and council seats and monuments in his honor, rewards beyond anything a janitor could have dreamed of, and he turned them all down. "I just want to go home," he said, and the diplomats and generals did not understand what he meant, because they thought home was a place of comfort and safety. But Marcus knew that home was not a destination, it was a purpose, and his purpose had always been simple: show up every day, do the work that needed to be done, and be ready when the universe needed him. The Celestial Accord was rebuilt and renamed the New Dawn, and Marcus returned to its halls with the Voranthai still hanging at his hip, and he asked for his old job back. The station administrators thought he was joking at first, but he was completely serious, and eventually they gave him a cleaning cart and a uniform, and left him to his work. He pushed his cart through the silver corridors, and nodded at the aliens who passed him, and they nodded back, now with respect in their eyes, and some of them stopped to talk with him, and share stories about where they had been when the Great Linking happened. Children asked to see the blade, and he showed it to them, letting them hold it for a moment so they could feel the connection humming through its metal, and he told them that they did not need a magical sword to be heroes. They just needed to care about something greater than themselves. Years passed and the seal held firm, and sometimes Marcus would feel a pulse through the blade, a reminder that he was still connected to billions of souls across the galaxy, and he would smile and continue mopping the floors. Because someone had to do it. Someone had to remind the great powers of the universe that greatness was not about titles or weapons or monuments. It was about showing up every single day and doing the work that no one else wanted to do. The human janitor had saved the galaxy, and then he had gone back to work, and that was the most human thing of all. The blade hung at his hip, just in case, a reminder that even the smallest person could change the course of history, that even the most overlooked soul could carry the light that pushed back the darkness. Realities. The seal held strong, woven from a billion acts of courage and love and hope, protecting everything that ever was or ever would be. This was the legacy of Marcus Cole, the janitor who awakened the forbidden blade, and his story would be told for as long as there were stars in the sky and beings to look up at them with wonder. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of light, and that light came from the connections between souls who chose to stand together against the darkness. That was the truth the precursors had never understood, the secret that only a human janitor could teach the galaxy. No one fights alone, no one suffers alone, no one hopes alone. We are all connected, and together we are unstoppable.